Kaitlin Shaw. So Kaitlin Shaw is a recent graduate of the University of Michigan, where she studied global environment and health. This fall, she will be attending Columbia School of Public Health to study epidemiology and global health. She's interested in studying HIV/AIDS and how the environment, socioeconomic status, and gender of an individual play strong roles in determining who gets sick. The module has been an invaluable tool in her own understanding of HIV and the structural oppression that facilitates its continual global rampage. Without further ado, Kaitlin Shaw.
Thank you, Ryan. Let's put this here. And I will be introducing our next panel, which centers on empowerment. So our first speaker will be Harleen Kaur. She's a recent graduate of the University of Michigan with a BA in English and a minor in Community Action Social Change. This fall, she will be embarking on an 8-month solo travel around the world as a Bonderman Fellow. Yay. Upon her return, Harleen would like to pursue a joint degree in law and public policy. Our second panelist will be Sami Shalabi. He's a recent graduate of the University of Michigan as well. He studied the Arabic language and international studies with a concentration in global environment and health. In the future, Sami hopes to attend dental school and ultimately work in Palestine as a dentist. And our final panel presenter will be Amanda Chahine. She's a Lebanese activist and co-founder of the Detroit grassroots collective, the Z Collective. The Z Collective's involvement with the POA has led to presentations at national conferences, translations into Arabic, and insight into implementing the different methodologies of teaching in other communities. Amanda is pursuing a career in global medicine and is hoping to specialize in infectious disease with a background in either obstetrics or pediatrics. Without further ado, our panelists.
Good morning, everyone. I think it's barely the morning still, so I'll use that opportunity. So as Katie indicated, I, and I believe my panelists as well, will be talking about empowerment, but more importantly, the barriers to empowerment and how that comes out through POA. So I'll be talking about my initial POA experience in the fall of 2013. And in order to do that, I'll have to give a bit of background information, but I feel like it's necessary to understanding my experiences. So I'll start there. So my experience was with Groundcover News, which is a street newspaper based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Before I explain about the organization itself, I'll backtrack and explain what is a street newspaper. So street papers are found not only around the United States, but actually around the world. There's actually one here in Johannesburg, and there's also one in Cape Town. So there are 2 street papers in South Africa as well. And street papers are essentially an opportunity for micro-entrepreneurship. So how it works is it essentially runs as a newspaper. They print generally monthly. Members of the community submit articles. It often focuses on local issues, as they tend to be local papers. But what's more interesting is that all of the vendors of the newspaper, the individuals who sell the paper, are part of the homeless or low-income poverty community. So the actual logistics of a street paper are that the organization prints the paper, the vendors will buy the paper for 25 to 50% of the cost that they then resell the paper. So for Groundcover News in Ann Arbor, the vendors are able to buy a paper for 25 cents and resell it for $1. And through these funds, they're able to support themselves and eventually, hopefully find a home, find a more permanent job, and sustain themselves and their family. The other component of a street paper, once it sort of becomes more successful and larger, is that it also supports the vendors and creates a sense of community. So there's a sense of ongoing social support and training opportunities, but I'll get into more details about that later. So I came across Groundcover News actually in October of my first year at Michigan. So it was one of the first organizations that I joined. It was not through the University of Michigan, but one of my good friends who had spent undergrad and was in his 2nd year of medical school at Michigan had been volunteering at the organization for the past 4 or 5 years. And so he took me to one of their first community meetings. And looking back now, it's really astonishing to see the differences between that meeting and how the organization ran 3 years later. I remember it was a little disorganized. There were a lot of community members there, some vendors, but there was a very loose agenda and sort of a lot of people talking over each other. And the reason for that is, at that point, Groundcover was actually only a year old. The editor, her name is Susan Beckett, she had decided to start a street paper in Ann Arbor based off of seeing one in Seattle called Real Change. And so what's interesting to me about Groundcover and my experience with them is that the structure of the organization, as you may have already seen, is that it truly is empowerment at its core. And so essentially, Groundcover does not really go out seeking vendors. Vendors come to the organization and say that they want to become part of it. They also have to adhere to the sort of values of the organization. So more so because of the communities that Groundcover is working with, they require that vendors actually stop. They're not allowed to drink or smoke within, I believe, 12 hours of when they're planning to sell their paper. And they're also not allowed to panhandle. So these are sort of two values that Groundcover upholds. And this plays in really interestingly with how the fact that a lot of the vendors are coming from backgrounds of being addicted to drugs and alcohol. And that's why the importance of the social support is really necessary. So what I saw as the strength of the organization actually came through the connection between local community members and the homeless community. It truly built a sense of community for the vendors in that they had weekly meetings, and during those meetings there would often be a time to celebrate birthdays amongst the vendors, to celebrate holidays, so they often had a Christmas party. The community members would make food and bring that in, so it truly created a sense of support for whatever issues they were going through. During my time, I believe a year after I joined the organization, we had the creation of an advisory board. So there was already an executive board in place to sort of hold logistical details. But what we realized was that in order for the organization to truly grow and serve the community, there needed to be a group of people that were in place to serve the vendors. And so that was sort of the creation of the advisory board. We were there to hold fundraisers so that the vendors could use that money to build more community resources. We also started holding skill building workshops. So one that I did was a social media workshop in which I taught vendors how to use Twitter, how to use Facebook, so they could actually tweet when they were standing at a certain intersection and where they were going to be posted up for the day so people could come find them. And this really started to build a sense of community between certain vendors and people who would often buy from them because it allowed them to engage in a way that was appealing to the local community. I think another part that was critical to Groundcover's sort of rising in sales and also success as an organization was their participation in local causes and alignment with local organizations. So there are several organizations in Ann Arbor that focus specifically on housing and low-income poverty. I don't have too much time to talk about those, but what I will say is that I think Groundcover empowered the individuals in the group to participate in causes that impacted them. So about two years ago, one of the homeless shelters in Ann Arbor in Washtenaw County was about to be shut down, Can't Take Notice, and that was a home that a lot of the vendors would go to during the winter when they needed shelter or they needed food. And what Groundcover did was find transport for the vendors to go out to the daily protests and participate in the cause until Can't Take Notice was decided to no longer be shut down. And I think that that sort of participation in causes that impacted them really allowed a lot of the vendors to feel empowered. So very quickly, when I took Misha's class in fall of 2013, I had been with Groundcover for 2 years, and so when she told us that this would be the first time that we would be working with Ann Arbor, Detroit communities, that was immediately the organization that I wanted to work with. But I think because I had sort of worked with them for a while, I forgot a lot of the struggles that came with working with them, and that led to really interesting experiences with them. So the first time we went to teach them the module, there were a lot of logistical nightmares. We had not accounted for the fact that the vendors had to leave by a certain time because they had to catch the last bus out of Ann Arbor back to Ypsilanti. We did not realize that a lot of them would have not eaten dinner, and so there was a hunger and attention span that did not allow us to sort of participate in a good sense of dialogue. And I think another factor that was interesting was that I found myself being fearful of what my classmates would think bringing them into this community. I think I spent a lot of time there during my 3 to 4 years, and I think that I was uncertain of how they would react to being in this space and to being with a community that is often very separated from the Ann Arbor U of M student population. And so I think one quote from Freire that sort of wrapped up my experiences with that was, "One cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding." And so I think in order to actually have a positive and beneficial experience for everyone involved, we had to understand where the members of Groundcover were coming from. We had to understand that they had to leave by a certain time, that it was up to us to provide food for them so that they could, we were truly asking them to sacrifice their evenings to be with us so we could have a beneficial experience by teaching the module. I think this is clearly a time when we gained much more than they did. But I think one final interesting experience is with the graduation ceremony of the module, and also afterwards. So for the graduation, our table was by far the most obnoxious and loud. We only had 2 vendors graduate, but one of them brought, I think, 6 or 7 people with him. His mom actually flew in from North Carolina, which is about a 4-hour flight, I would say. So she flew 4 hours to come see him get this certificate. And I think what was so astonishing about that was that even though this vendor, Joe, had lived in Ann Arbor for about 6 or 7 years, that graduation was the first time that he had stepped in a University of Michigan building. And I think that was so upsetting to me because there is a clear, not only until a few months ago were vendors even allowed to sell close to the University of Michigan campus. And I think this clear divide between sort of the educated people in Ann Arbor and the rest had really, I think, stumped the growth of Groundcover. And it wasn't until that it got over that and was able to access the university were they able to really thrive. And then one quick thing, because I know I'm running out of time, but I remember going to Nisha one day because I ran into Joe when I came back in the fall for my senior year, and we were trying to find teachers for the new 443. And Nisha, as several people have mentioned, had this idea to bring in students from the previous year. And I remember I told her that I didn't think it was good to bring Joe in because I had run into him the previous night actually panhandling on the street, as well as he was very intoxicated and high. And I remember that, I think that was because he was one of the vendors that I was closest to over the past 3 or 4 years, and generally vendors who are with Groundcover for a long period of time have an easier time sort of sustaining and living within that organization. And so I think that was a really interesting moment for me because, and going back to previous presentations, the fact that I'm here talking about sort of my experience with him and my experience with Groundcover, and they're all, a lot of them are still struggling to get food and homes. I think that sort of is a reminder that for the individuals who are often learning the module, it's a daily struggle of overcoming and challenging the circumstances within which they live. And I think that is sort of the largest barrier, is that it's not just overcoming it once, it's that it's a daily struggle and they have to keep fighting that. And so I think I'll wrap up with a Freire quote, which I think touches on this too, but it says, "The greatest humanistic and historical task of the oppressed is to liberate themselves." Thank you.
Thank you for that, Harleen. Can everybody hear me? So I just want to preface this talk. There's a lot of things I'm going to be talking about, and people have complete dissertations, books, all that stuff about just a statement or two that I will say. So if anything is vague or not clear, that's completely my fault, and I'm sorry. I am a child of Palestinian immigrants, and this gives me inherent bias in the issue. I can't ignore that. But I will try to just state facts right now and stay away from the emotion, but just letting you know that there is inherent bias in everything I say. Growing up as a Palestinian immigrant, you realize that struggle, that resistance is not something that you just do, that's something you do, it's a part of who you are. I recall going to Friday prayer with my father, and on the way home he'd take a detour, and I would be at City Hall, and we'd be protesting. And that was just something we did. It's part of who you are. This existence is resistance mentality. And that carries on through everything that we do. So first I'm going to tackle the issue of empowerment, okay? What is empowerment? This great activist buzzword that we all use. And the way I've learned it, I've defined it, is the transfer of power from one source to another. For example, Nisha's module. When we teach it, students learn it, they put their own twist on it, they teach it back. They have mastered the material. They are empowered over the module. You can contrast that to my experience in organic chemistry. I just learned it, and it owned me. I did not master it. And that's the difference. So with that definition, I'm going to try to contextualize the Palestinian struggle. Just a real quick, so I just know who's in the room. If you have a general understanding of the issue, and you can speak to it for about a minute, and all your information is not from Fox or CNN, just put your hand up really high. If you have a decent understanding, you can just put your hand next to your face, and if you don't know too much about it, that's okay, just keep your hand down. So if I could just see the room real quick.
Understanding
Of the Palestinian-Israeli issue, yes. Okay, cool. So I'll try not to turn this too much into a history lesson, but give you the necessary context to tackle the issues of the panel. So pre-World War I, this area, this area called Palestine, before World War I, where all the green is the Arab land, the Palestinian land, and there was religious conflict there. There was and two rising kind of parties, if you will, Arab nationalism and Jewish Zionism. And these things were growing until World War II happened. And after World War II, there were hundreds of thousands of Jews that were relocated. And the UN, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, had this investigation made up of 11 people where they went, they investigated Palestine, if you will, and came up with the plan that they presented to both the Jewish Zionists and the Arab nationalists, where they would split the land binationally, or if they would make one state where they joined it economically. And the Jews wanted the economic putting it together, joining, and the Arabs rejected both of them. And after the Arabs rejected both of them, this caused a lot of violence. And in 1947, when the UN went to vote on this issue, at first it was in favor of rejecting the resolution. But after severe pro-lobbying throughout the whole world, they decided to pass Resolution 181, which was the outlining of the 1947 line right here. So you can see the land before and then the land after. This is considered the West Bank, this is the Gaza Strip, and then everything in the white is Israel. So these are the lines drew in 1947. These are the internationally recognized laws. Okay, and I'll get back to a little bit after the map. It's right now, actually. So since then, there has been increasing illegal settlements, and these are under international law illegal. They are pushing within the West Bank. If you can see, this is between 1949 and 1967, and then now today. Well, as of 2000, it's even smaller now. And these are pushing Palestinians out of their homes. People are receiving eviction notices 24 hours before, and that they have to leave. And all these settlements are being built, and all these people are being relocated. And we can see in the modern day picture, Palestinians now own about 20% of the land. So it went from over 90% to about 20% right now. And we can briefly talk about the Gaza Strip right here. This is 145 square miles, 1.5 million people. It's one of the highest population densities in the world. It is considered to be the largest open-air prison. There is a blockade. Barely anything goes in or out, including people. There is a lack of jobs, lack of water, lack of electricity. There's uncertainty and fear. And the UN Relief did a study, and they said that the Gaza Strip could be considered unlivable by 2020. And that's only 5 short years away. And this study came out about 2 years ago. So it's a very concerning thing that isn't really, it's talked about but not really understood. And now I want to shift the focus of the Palestinian struggle and try to link it with the South African struggle. Because lots of people try to make that ties, and it's important to know that there's a lot of similarities and some differences as well. I just want to read you a quote by the Archbishop himself. I'm a black South African, and if I were to change the names, a description of what is happening in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank could describe events in South Africa. Okay, these are 2 struggles, 2 instances of apartheid. 2 instances of apartheid that are funded by the United States of America. 2 minorities ruling over a majority, ethnic majority. And the way the struggle has been, the Palestinian struggle has tried to copy lots of the South African struggle with divestment, for example. South Africa started the divestment from the universities, that was a big thing. There's a current movement for the BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanctions. At the University of Michigan, we tried to divest a few times, but that's a different story for a different time. But there are differences as well. The way the ANC was, the leadership of the ANC, the way the ANC was viewed by other activists, it had more of a accepted thought process. With like Fatah and Hamas and things like this, they believe the existence is resistance, but they are viewed and categorized actually by the United States as terrorist organizations. So that puts a dark light and a shadow to the rest of the world to accept things that they believe in. And at the core, South African apartheid was based on economic, exploiting the economic situation, the natural resources. They wanted to separate the blacks from the whites from the coloreds so that money could stay with the whites. And in Palestine, it's become ethnic cleansing, just a complete obliteration and erasing of the people off the map. And now with all this, we want to talk about empowerment. Back to empowerment, just really briefly. So what did we say empowerment was? Transferring of power from one source to another, right? And we need to recognize that not all empowerment is the same. There are different levels of empowerment. I really want to read a quote. I don't know if you've ever heard of Steve Biko. I'm going to read a quote by him. The most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Okay? And with this mind, and another example, another definition I ran into about empowerment was that it's the interactive process that occurs between an individual and their environment. So how then can a Palestinian be empowered? We can take into consideration that this is the expectation by the youth, especially born today. There is violence, there is guns, there is fear. So the oppressor has implanted that into the minds of the oppressed. They expect to be oppressed. So revolutionary change is very hard to come by without this consciousness. And it comes to the sad realization that yes, if we were to take this module and teach it, let's say to one primary school child in the Gaza Strip, and she were to learn it, master it, teach it back. So she is then empowered over the module. But she is not an empowered person. If we were to teach it to the whole Gaza Strip, and they taught it back, and they put their own spins on it, they would still not be an empowered people. And that's the sad reality that we have to come to, because there is no power in the land itself. That has been taken from them, so there's no agency. So that's where we challenge this sense of empowerment. The society restricts what goes out of there. And as long as these individuals do not have social freedom, political freedom, things that are granted to us as privileged Americans, they cannot have power in that system because it's restricted.
It's going to be tough to follow. Hi guys. Could I? Someone pass me that? Thank you very much. So hello. Hello. I'm glad we all got to have that 10-minute break so we could kind of recoup, wake up, grab some food. So is everybody with me right now?
Yeah.
Cool. First of all, I'd like to congratulate my fellow 2 panelists on excellent presentations.
both of which I think speak out to the work that me and my collective do back at home, which I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about. Yeah, it's definitely not irrelevant to what I'm going to be speaking about next, and it's not irrelevant to, you know, my life and I feel like my activist purposes. So I'm really glad that they discussed that. So the title of my presentation is called "The Revolution Starts at Home." What I really want to focus on is Dr. Hanif's method of praxis as far as using POA as a method of getting the people in the community to stimulate their own revolution, to stimulate their own form of empowerment, exactly like Sami was mentioning. And what I want to talk about is, I guess, my personal experience with POA and what that's been like over the last 18 months, and also how POA has affected different social organizing groups and collectives back in the Detroit area, and how it's affected their method of working in communities. So, yeah, oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so just super quick story of self, so you guys know a little bit about me. I identify as an activist, a feminist. I'm a Lebanese American. I recently received my Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, and I plan on pursuing a degree in medicine. So now I want to talk to you guys about the Z Collective. So the Z Collective is an initiative-based grassroots activist collective. It's comprised of mainly Arab and or Muslim and allied feminists. It's one of the first female-led social justice organizations of its kind in the Dearborn area. And basically what our core purpose is to serve as a bridge between existing efforts of social organizing and social, I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Dearborn is a small township in southeast Michigan, and its population is comprised of mainly Arab American immigrants and Arab immigrants and Arab Americans as well. So it's one of the cities in America that has the highest concentration of Arabs. So I guess that puts it in context. Thank you. So the reason our core purpose is to serve as a bridge for efforts and support systems that currently already exist is we really want to provide a holistic approach to supporting marginalized populations. So we find that one of the major issues is not that there aren't enough resources out there, but that people don't know that that is part of an issue. But a major reason or a major issue is people don't know how to allocate those resources. People don't know that there are certain resources out there. So there isn't enough promotion of it, there isn't enough of a holistic combination of everyone's support to sort of provide that support for the people in the community. We personally believe in the agency of people and persons and their individual capacity to change their own circumstances that are, that lead to discrimination based on sexism, racism, oppression of LGBTQ persons and values, etc. Now, the foundation of our purpose involves the driving force of the home community itself and the home communities that we work with. And that in turn makes the personal very political for us, and vice versa. Political becomes very personal as well. So we wanted to start with our own small community. When we first got together as a collective, we wanted to kind of start small and branch outwards, just as any newborn organization would strive to do. And this is kind of where I'm getting at with the whole revolution starts at home. So the revolution starts at home is so similar to the POA group using the Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire and a number of other works as sort of their like methodological Bible or something to help inspire our specific method of community work. The Revolution Starts at Home has served a very similar purpose to the Z Collective. So it's basically the name of a book that peers into activist communities that work to drive revolutions and the problems that exist within those activist communities. It mainly notes the importance of the role of the home community within social change and initiating social movements. And it particularly emphasizes that the struggling must be able to empower themselves rather than the misconstrued practice of people, of strangers, privileged strangers coming in and lifting them up and simply leaving. And this is exactly what POA does. Rather than us coming in with this module with the privilege of the knowledge and the information that we have and then leaving with it, we come into the communities and we work with them on learning the material, on building a foundation, like a solid foundation of the information and of the knowledge that they've gained. And once they feel like they've owned that information and put their individual twists on it, they can redistribute that throughout their own communities. So what's important about this is that the people that we're teaching, the people who belong to those home communities, who have lived through the struggle, who understand that the people around them, what exactly they need from that method, they're able to redistribute it in a way that we cannot, because they understand the struggle that we don't. So they kind of, not just bringing on their individualistic approach to promote, individual creativity, but also they understand the situation better than we can. And in turn, this helps fuel the shift and the improvement within their communities, and it's stimulated by the people themselves. As I've said, this is a main part of what the Z Collective strives to do. We basically organize our entire framework under this methodology. And this is partly why we've taken so much pleasure and privilege in working so closely with POA for the last 18 months. So basically, how did we get involved? Well, we were, one of our collective members was able to network with Professor Hanif, and we had the privilege of experiencing learning the module and being able to teach it back and earning certificates from the University of Michigan Ann Arbor. And this was in December 2013. And we didn't realize, well, we were very blown away by the method throughout which Dr. Hanif went about spreading this education. But more importantly, I'm going to jump back to the whole personal being political as well. That reality became very significant to us in a way that we were not expecting. Soon after learning the module, we learned that one of our dearest friends was dying of AIDS. His AIDS had progressed to one of the last stages, and it was slowly taking him away. And this is a picture of Sami. And one reason that I want to bring this up is because the significance of Sami being HIV positive is that he was infected with HIV for a matter of years and nobody knew about it. Partly because Sami at the time was closeted about his sexuality, he was closeted about his status, and he wasn't educated enough and aware about what how his status would affect him as a person and how it wouldn't. So that misconception led to silence being his killer and not AIDS, or rather the collection of other diseases that kills people who die with AIDS or die from AIDS. Silence was his killer. So we realized the significance to the core. It hit us pretty hard. So that was when we realized that, I guess getting involved with POA couldn't have happened at a better time. And this inspired us to do a lot of other work with the pedagogy of action. So our passion for this work has definitely grown since then, and it's led to so many other opportunities to continue to grow with this work and to make innovative contributions to the module's promotion and efficiency. So what we've done since then is we've worked with other local LGBTQ solidarity organizations and Arab LGBTQ organizations back in Dearborn to help translate the module into Arabic. And we presented that at the graduation last December. And then we were invited to present at the annual LGBTQ Muslim retreat in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There we presented the module, and it definitely didn't come as a shock that we received massive support from community social organizers from all over the continent. We had people from Toronto, Seattle, Boston, New York, that sort of a thing. And basically the module received so much support and so much praise because I guess a praxis of its kind is so unique to people in social organizing that this could be utilized as an excellent tool. The next way we used POA as like an inspiration for our implementation was the domestic violence and vow awareness pamphlet that we came up with. So that's where justice comes in. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about that. So when the Z Collective was first established, one of the first projects we decided to focus on was domestic abuse and its prevalence in the Arab immigrant communities in Dearborn. We understood that there were too many misconceptions within the culture, too much misunderstanding within the religion, and there wasn't enough talk about why situations like this were unjust and oppressive certain groups of people. And the point was that there wasn't even a conversation about it. So we thought that this would be an excellent way to start. And the pedagogy of action really helped us to formulate, so as a part of this project, we not only came up with a presentation, and we presented a documentary called, it's escaping me right now. But basically, okay, that's escaping me. But we were able to formulate a presentation to share with the community, and we created a pamphlet. So the pamphlet, the purpose of the pamphlet was not just to give people your standard statistics about psychological factors of domestic abuse, why domestic abuse is wrong, why the culture is just painting a very skewed picture of how domestic abuse functions within the community. Okay. So part of the I guess the portion of the pamphlet that discussed justice. So this was a step-by-step. I suppose. Okay. So they were steps that that people within the community could take to help them lead or help themselves lead their own path to independence, lead their own path to personal empowerment. And that was definitely inspired by the simplified language and the methodology of the POA, and that's exactly how we formulated the pamphlet. And we found that it received massive support from people within the community. Some of the first few times that we presented to the community members, we were constantly seeking feedback, and these people were. It was a very refreshing method for them, because while the language was simplified, they didn't feel like they were being spoken down to, which is exactly what I felt like the POA has been able to provide for people in the community that it serves. And then, of course, the continuing of training. So I was very honored to have been asked by Nisha to come back to U of M and teach the module to some of our undergraduate students in 443 last fall. And so it's done a lot for us there. Now, future implementation. So we wanted to use the methodology as a model for future community organizing. Particularly one method that we're currently focusing on, and that my collective back home is working tirelessly at, but hopefully we're going to be able to implement this before the end of the summer. But this is something called Supriya Adala. So if you want to break up the word to translate really quick, so Supriya is sort of like a traditional morning brunch within the Arab culture, and Adala means justice. So we wanted to call it like a justice brunch. Now this is the reason that we wanted to take this avenue of speaking to the people in the community is because what way, or I suppose on what platform can you find them in their utmost comfort? When can you find them when they're the most comfortable, when they're the most, I guess, receptive to what's being told to them? So rather than having people come to us, here's a big, fancy event, you sit there, take our pamphlet, watch the presentation, and then go home and stick that on your refrigerator and forget about it 3 days later. Instead, we reach out to the community members, or to the members of the community, and in sort of, in a very POA-inspired way, just allow the language to flow simplistically and allow it to be more of a conversation with the people of the community. So we took the education that we organized within the pamphlet, and we allowed it to be simplified, and we wanted to spread it within the home community. And the Justice Brunch was meant to serve where social justice issues are discussed very informally, and we can. And then we can receive, I guess, feedback on their personal experiences and their knowledge of the situation. When I mentioned earlier, there was a documentary that we showed at some of our presentations, and the name was escaping me. One of the really important things of that documentary was a portion of it was a young woman delivering a monologue about her personal experience going through a domestically abusive situation. And in the second half of the documentary, well, she's presenting the monologue to a group of older generation Arab women. I think they were in Palestinian refugee camps that were located in Lebanon. And it was really interesting to focus in on that demographic of people. Because when most people think of social change and who has the greatest impact on social change, yes, you would think of youth. while we absolutely agree with that, we're also trying to shift the entire paradigm that the culture has set in place over decades and decades, and it's been reinforced even by the people who are oppressed in that community. They've just been convinced that that's the way it is. So who do we target? We target the demographic of people who we feel have the greater influence on the people, the mothers, you know, the elderly figures who people feel are more knowledgeable and have experienced the tradition in some of its harshest manners, if that makes any sense. So I guess what I want to close up with is, you know, the POA has definitely influenced not just specific projects within the Z Collective, but it's influenced the way we look at the challenges that are going to come with social organizing in the future and everything that we aspire to do within our communities. Just in so many ways. I'm running out of time, but that's. Also, that's the Z Collective email. You can also look us up on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. Please show us your support, or feel free to contact us with any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you to our panelists. Great presentations from Harleen, Sami, and Amanda. We just have a few minutes just to answer some questions you might have. We're running a little short on time. Lindsay's going to come around with the microphone. If you can just speak loud and clearly, that would be appreciated.
I know we do not have time to talk about UFFS, but my question for you, Sami, is has there been any thought of creating a similar module for educating, empowering people on campus to have an accessible way to teach others about this conflict?
Specifically the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
Yes.
In terms of a module, there has not been. I'm part of an organization, or I was part of, it's called the Students Ally for Freedom and Equality, and this is part of a national branch with over 100 universities throughout the world, and every year there's a conference to link strategies, build connections, and talk about this activism. So while there's not a module, we have weekly teach-ins about specific events in history, specific tactics that have occurred. And there's a lot of outreach and solidarity work, because it is a marginalized group that we base our efforts on solidarity work. So that's something that has been taken care of, but that's a very interesting point of a module, to break things down in an elementary way, but to make it appeal to a larger message. Yeah.
Yeah, I asked that specifically because I really want to speak on it, and I want to give other people that information, but I still don't feel like I have the tools to do that, or the education to do that. So I think a module for people that are trying to ally with the community would be helpful, but not possible. Thank you.
I wanted to ask this during the previous panel as well. And so this is maybe something that we can continue to talk about. But when we talk about engaged learning and POA and empowerment, or limitations of empowerment, let me backtrack a little bit. When we are preparing to come for this trip, it is a frustrating experience, I think, for all of us to be asked or be told, have a nice time in Africa, take lots of photos, are you going to be really dark when you get back? And so I'm curious how you all explain what you're doing and how empowerment fits into it compared to other types of programs or educational platforms when people ask you about it, or do you choose to kind of not engage with maybe certain types of people or questions when those things come up?
I can start. So I think my response has a lot to do with my background. I think both just like family values, and also a large part of my faith is the idea of service, but less than service is, or more importantly than service is selfless service. So I think realizing that the people you're serving are much more important than yourself. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I think, I don't know if coping mechanism is the right word, but how I sort of processed working with Groundcover, and then when I sort of helped out with a group going to help in Detroit, which is an HIV positive group, I think my sort of processing of the fact that we and myself were leaving with so much more than what we were giving the group was the notion that I needed to humble myself to the notion of serving other people. I think to make a larger connection, this is something that I'm thinking a lot about with my upcoming fellowship, and the fact that simply by the structure of the fellowship, I will be constantly entering and exiting communities that are not my own. And so for me, the way to make that at least somewhat significant is that the reason I am doing that is so I can learn more about the values and the cultures of that community, and then be able to use my own privilege in order to create policy change or new community organizations to help those, I hate the word help, but to benefit those communities. And so I guess my response is sort of, yeah, involved service.
For me, this is an issue that actually really hits home. Unfortunately, in the Arab community, there is lots of fear of the unknown, and specifically anti-blackness that harvests in the community. So when I said I was going to Africa, I mean, I got a million terrible questions, but like, for example, when I told one of my family members I wanted to go shark diving in Cape Town, one of them actually told me, "Why would you go shark diving in Cape Town? These are African sharks." As if they're more hungry. So it's these types of things that really have made me sad and reject parts of my culture, but at the same time, I try to use it as a means of educating. This is something I've become very conscious of, especially with Nisha and other social justice organizations. Something I try to say all around is that, especially like linking it back to Palestine, you cannot be a Palestinian activist advocating for human rights if you are not a social justice activist, because those things tie in to each other. And if you reject, if you're homophobic, if you are anti-black but you're a Palestinian activist, you're taking away from the struggle itself, and you are marginalizing the solidarity and restricting it. So these are things I try to take head on, try to talk about.
In a very similar community of people, you know, there tends to be a lot of sometimes unintentional ignorance that comes with you know, having a very narrow mind about what else goes on in the world. So, you know, lots of questions that I've received, you know, upon just telling family members, "Oh, I'm going to be in Africa for a couple of weeks," and at first, and they would be curious, "Oh, to do what?" But it wasn't, you know, it was either, "Oh, you're going to save people there. How nice! You're going to come back and you're going to be a changed woman when you do." I'm like, well, that's not, you know, that's doesn't even, you know, it's completely irrelevant from what the experience is meant to contribute. But then you'll have those responses, but then you'll also have, "Oh, so you got all your shots then, didn't you? You're probably going to get malaria while you're there. Please be careful. You should wear long sleeve shirts. I hear those help. You're so pale. You're so pale. You're going to burn there." Like very similar things. So, I guess there are times when, you know, when facing ignorant comments like that, you know, there's only so much that you can say to educate people on the spot about something like that. That requires a good lengthy understanding of the fact that, you know, we're all humans. We've all faced struggle, whether it's similar or different. We've all had to go through, well, I guess in reference to, you know, the community of people that I come from, and then Africans or South Africans in particular, just like Sami said, we've had a lot of struggles and oppression and like oppressive circumstances that are very parallel to one another. So thinking of them as separate struggles and sort of having that anti-blackness constantly being reinforced throughout the culture, it's kind of hard to find a response every time. But I usually just try by, first off, explaining that I'm not going there to do, you know, I'm not going there to save anyone. I'm really just visiting one particular area for only a certain amount of time to see, you know, I guess, experience the circumstances that these people have to live through every single day, and give them the tools and only hope that they can use that, and it can allow them to spread just a good foundation of education and empowerment in their own communities. So really emphasizing that it's not me doing the work, it's them.
Great. Well, that's about all we have time for. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to lunch.